Over 2,000 miles, countless hikers, but some never come back the same way they left. The Appalachian Trail spans from Georgia to Maine, winding through some of America's most pristine wilderness. Every year, hundreds of thousands venture onto this iconic path, seeking adventure, solitude, and connection with nature. But what they don't know is that the trail has a dark history. A history that locals refuse to speak about openly. There are sections of the Appalachian Trail where experienced hikers refuse to venture after dark. Sections where search and rescue teams have found only scattered belongings. Sections where the only explanation is the unexplainable. What follows are 7 terrifying true stories from the Appalachian Trail. Encounters so disturbing, so impossibly strange, that the hikers who experienced them have spent years trying to convince themselves it was all just a bad dream. One hiker disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a journal describing impossible figures moving through the forest. Another claims something ancient watches the trail at night, something with intelligence, with hunger. And one group of 4 hikers, only 3 returned. The survivor? They refused to ever speak about what they saw. If you're planning to hike the Appalachian Trail, you need to hear these stories first. These are the 7 most terrifying true stories from the Appalachian Trail. Story 1. Robert's disappearance. In September 2009, a man named Robert Mitchell, age 34, set out on what should have been a routine 3-week solo hiking journey along the Appalachian Trail. Robert was an experienced hiker. He'd completed several long-distance trails before. He was fit, well-prepared, and mentally sharp. According to his friends, he was excited about the trek. There was nothing to suggest that this hike would be anything other than successful. Robert started his journey near Springer Mountain in Georgia, the southern terminus of the trail. The first 2 weeks went smoothly. He sent occasional text messages to friends, updates about the weather, the scenery, his progress. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But on day 15, something changed. His messages became less frequent. When he did text, his tone shifted. He mentioned feeling watched. He said the forest felt different in certain areas. He described feeling an inexplicable sense of dread when approaching certain sections of the trail. Sections that appeared, on the map, completely unremarkable. His friend, David, who received most of these messages, later said, Robert was not someone who got scared easily. He was pragmatic, logical. So when he started mentioning this feeling of being watched, I took it seriously. On day 16, Robert sent his last coherent message. It read simply, "Something isn't right here. The trees feel wrong. I'm stopping at the next shelter." Then, nothing. When Robert failed to respond to messages for 48 hours, his family contacted the authorities. A search and rescue operation was launched immediately. What they found was shocking. Robert's tent was discovered, perfectly set up, near an established shelter site. His supplies were organized, his sleeping bag was laid out, but Robert was gone. Inside the tent, authorities found something even more disturbing: Robert's hiking journals. The final entries were the most alarming. In the days leading up to his disappearance, Robert's handwriting became increasingly erratic. His entries shifted from detailed observations about the trail to increasingly frantic, disjointed thoughts. The last complete entry, dated 2 days before his disappearance, read, "I've been seeing them now for 3 days. At first, I thought it was shadows. The way the trees block out the sun here creates strange shapes. But these shapes, they move. They move against the wind. They move when nothing else is moving. Tonight, I saw them clearly. They're tall, impossibly tall, maybe 9, maybe 10 feet. Their bodies are thin, skeletal. I can almost count their ribs through their skin, even from a distance. Their limbs are too long, disjointed. The strangest part? Their heads. I haven't seen their faces clearly, but I can feel them looking at me. And when they look, I feel seen, truly seen, like they're looking through me, through my skin, into my thoughts. I'm going to try to hike out tomorrow morning. I'm going to move fast. I'm not stopping. I don't know what these things are, but I know they don't want me here." Robert's journal ended there. The next page was filled with frantic scratching. Just lines and scribbles, as if he'd panicked while writing. He was never found. Search and rescue teams combed the area for weeks. They found no trace of Robert Mitchell. No body. No remains. It was as if he vanished into the forest itself. The official report concluded that Robert likely had a mental health crisis on the trail, perhaps triggered by isolation or the stress of solo hiking, and either took his own life or wandered into the wilderness and became lost. The figures he described were attributed to pareidolia, a psychological phenomenon where the brain interprets random shapes and patterns as familiar objects, often faces. But those who knew Robert disagreed. His brother, Michael, gave an interview years later. Robert wasn't depressed. He wasn't suicidal. He was terrified. And he was terrified of something real. "I don't care what the search and rescue report says. My brother saw something out there that he couldn't explain. And whatever it was, it took him." To this day, Robert's disappearance remains unsolved. His hiking journal is kept in a storage unit by his family. They rarely speak about his case publicly, but those close to them know one thing for certain. Robert Mitchell never chose to leave that trail. He was taken. Story 2. The Midnight Watcher. Some hikers report brief, startling encounters on the trail. A strange sound, a fleeting shadow, an inexplicable feeling. But what makes the story of the Midnight Watcher so unsettling is that the encounter wasn't brief. It lasted all night. In July 2014, a group of 4 hikers, all in their mid-20s, all experienced backpackers, decided to tackle a challenging section of the Appalachian Trail in North Carolina. The group consisted of Marcus, Jake, Sarah, and Emma. They were childhood friends who tried to do an annual hiking trip together. The section they chose was remote, beautiful, and relatively isolated. Perfect for what they thought would be a standard weekend hiking adventure. On the second night of their trip, they set up camp near a high-altitude shelter. The weather was clear, the stars were visible, and everything seemed perfect. They cooked dinner, talked around the campfire, and eventually settled into their tents for the night. Around midnight, Marcus woke up. He couldn't explain why he woke. No noise, no disturbance. Just a sudden jolt back to consciousness. He lay in his tent for a moment, listening, trying to figure out what had pulled him from sleep. That's when he felt it. A presence. Something outside the tent, watching. Marcus later described it as an overwhelming sensation of being observed. Not just casually noticed, but intensely focused on. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to stay silent, to not move, to not acknowledge whatever was outside. He slowly unzipped a small opening in his tent and peered out into the darkness. What he saw made his blood go cold. Standing at the edge of their campsite, approximately 30 feet away, was a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, silhouetted against the starlight. Marcus could make out its basic shape. A thin, elongated body with abnormally long arms that hung down past where its knees should have been. The figure wasn't moving. It was just standing there, watching. Marcus froze. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. And neither did the figure. They stared at each other for what Marcus said felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then, slowly, the figure's head tilted. A single movement, like a bird examining something curious. Marcus snapped his tent flap shut and lay down, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He told himself it was a trick of the light, a shadow, a tree branch, anything other than what his eyes had registered. But then he heard something that confirmed his worst fear. Footsteps. The figure was circling the campsite. Slowly, deliberately. Its footsteps were heavy and measured, crunching on the forest floor. And it didn't hurry. It took its time, moving from tent to tent, pausing at each one. When it reached Marcus's tent, it stopped. Marcus held his breath. He could hear the figure breathing, deep, rhythmic breaths that sounded almost human, but not quite. The breathing was too hollow, like wind moving through an empty tunnel. The figure remained outside his tent for what felt like hours. Then, without warning, it moved on. Marcus heard it approach Jake's tent, then Sarah's, then Emma's. By this point, the other three were awake. Marcus could hear Jake's sharp intake of breath, could sense the fear radiating from the nearby tents. After circling the camp 3 times, the figure moved to the edge of the campsite and stopped. For the rest of the night, it stood there, watching, just watching. Marcus later said, "The worst part wasn't the fear. The worst part was knowing that it knew we were afraid, that it could feel our terror, and it enjoyed it." That presence lasted all night. I checked my watch at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and 5 a.m. Every time I looked, it was still there, just watching, just breathing. At dawn, when the sky began to lighten, the figure slowly walked backward into the forest and disappeared. The group broke camp immediately. They hiked out in silence, none of them willing to speak about what had happened until they were safely back in civilization. When they did finally talk about it, their accounts were remarkably consistent. All 4 had seen the figure. All 4 had felt the same overwhelming presence of being observed by something intelligent and deeply wrong. Sarah, the most rational of the group, later gave an interview to a paranormal investigator. "What I remember most clearly is the feeling of being studied, like we weren't hikers who had randomly encountered something unusual, like we were expected, like it had been watching for us, waiting for us. And when we finally showed up, it was satisfied. It had what it was looking for." None of the 4 have returned to that section of the Appalachian Trail since that night. In fact, none of them have returned to the trail at all. Marcus, who was the most experienced of the group and had dreamed of completing the entire trail, hasn't hiked since 2014. When asked why, he simply says, "Some places aren't meant for humans. Some parts of the world are inhabited by things that don't want us there." That night taught me that lesson. To this day, hikers report similar encounters in that same section of trail. A tall, impossibly thin figure that watches from the darkness. A presence that circles camps in the night. And whatever it is, it still watches. Story 3. The Silent Hiker. Some of the most disturbing stories from the Appalachian Trail aren't about encounters with unknown entities. Sometimes, they're about encounters with people who shouldn't exist. In October 2011, a solo hiker named Daniel Chen, age 28, was making his way north on the Appalachian Trail. He was experienced, well-equipped, and maintaining a good pace. He'd been on the trail for 2 weeks and was feeling strong. One afternoon, while hiking through a dense section of forest in Virginia, Daniel noticed another hiker ahead of him on the trail. This wasn't unusual. The trail sees hundreds of hikers every day. But something about this person caught his attention. The hiker was dressed in clothes that looked old. Not just well-worn, but genuinely old-fashioned. The style of the backpack, the cut of the clothes, even the hiking boots seemed to belong to a different era. Daniel, curious by nature, decided to pick up his pace to see if he could catch up and maybe have a conversation. The trail was getting long, and he hadn't spoken to another person in days. But no matter how fast he hiked, he couldn't close the gap. The figure ahead always remained the same distance away, visible but unreachable. This continued for hours. Daniel would quicken his pace, and so would the figure. Daniel would slow down, and the figure would slow down too. They maintained a constant distance of approximately 50 to 100 yards. As the sun began to set, Daniel became increasingly concerned. He still hadn't caught up to the figure, despite his efforts. And the figure had never looked back, never waved, never acknowledged Daniel's existence in any way. Then, just as the light was fading, the figure stopped at a shelter. It was an established shelter, one marked on Daniel's map. The figure walked to the shelter and simply disappeared inside. Daniel, Desperate for human interaction and also deeply curious about this strange hiker, hurried to catch up. He reached the shelter just as twilight was settling in. The shelter was empty. There was no one inside. No backpack, no supplies, no evidence that anyone had ever been there. And most disturbingly, there was no other way out. The shelter was a standard three-sided structure with an open front. No back exit, no hidden passages. Daniel searched the area around the shelter, calling out, thinking perhaps the figure had just stepped out. Nothing. He checked his trail map and his GPS. He was exactly where he thought he was. The shelter was real, the location was correct, but the hiker was gone. That night, Daniel stayed at the shelter, though he slept very little. The next morning, he examined the shelter more carefully. He found something that made his skin crawl. On the shelter's register, a logbook where hikers record their names, the date, and brief comments, he found an entry dated October 3, 1962. The name was unreadable. The ink had faded too much with age. But the comment was still legible. 3-day journey from the last shelter. Long walk ahead. Daniel checked the date. It was October 3, 1962. 49 years before he was standing in that shelter. But more disturbing, the handwriting in the 1962 entry bore a striking resemblance to scratches and marks he'd noticed on trees and rocks during his hike. Marks that looked like they'd been made recently, but by whom, he had no idea. Daniel hiked out that day and never returned to that section of trail. Years later, he gave an interview to a paranormal research team. "I don't know what I saw that day, but I know what I didn't see. I didn't see a living person. A living person can't maintain pace with you for 8 hours without ever acknowledging you. A living person can't vanish into an empty shelter. And a living person's handwriting from 50 years ago can't match marks on trees I passed yesterday. I think what I saw was a memory, or a ghost, or something that exists between those two things. Something that replays its journey over and over, night after night, year after year, on that same section of trail." Other hikers have reported seeing the figure since Daniel's encounter. The descriptions are always the same. A hiker in outdated clothing, maintaining a constant distance, never responding to attempts at communication, disappearing at shelter sites. Some hikers have even reported seeing the entry in the shelter register, dated to different years, but always 40 to 50 years in the past, always with that same haunting comment about a long walk ahead. The question remains, is something trapped on that section of the trail, compelled to hike the same route over and over? Or is it something far more disturbing? A glimpse into another reality, running parallel to our own, where the same hiker has been walking for nearly a century. Story 4. The Vanishing Couple. Sometimes, the most haunting stories from the Appalachian Trail aren't about sudden disappearances or paranormal encounters. Sometimes, they're about the small, inexplicable details that make you question what you're seeing with your own eyes. In August 2007, a young couple named James and Catherine, both 24 years old, both recent college graduates, set out on a romantic hiking trip. They wanted to hike a 50-mile section of the trail and camp under the stars. It was meant to be a memorable experience, a celebration of their new life together. What it became was a descent into shared madness and eventual tragedy. The first few days went smoothly. The weather was beautiful, the trail was relatively easy, and the couple was enjoying their time together. They documented their journey with a digital camera, taking photos at scenic overlooks and at their campsites. But starting on day 4, something began to go wrong. The couple started noticing strange inconsistencies in their photos. When James reviewed the pictures from an overlook they'd stopped at that morning, he noticed something odd. In several of the photos, there was a figure in the background, a person, standing at the edge of the view, barely visible but unmistakably present. But neither James nor Catherine had seen this person. And more disturbing, they had no memory of a third person being at the overlook with them. They discussed it over dinner that night, laughing nervously. Maybe someone had walked by while they were distracted. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But then they reviewed more photos. In pictures taken at their campsite that first night, a figure appeared in the trees behind their tent. A person, standing at the edge of the forest, watching them. In photos from the second night's campsite, the same figure was visible. This time, closer. By the third night, the figure was in almost every photo. And with each new batch of pictures, it was closer to the campsite. Catherine became increasingly disturbed by the photos. James tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a shadow. Maybe it was a tree that resembled a person. Maybe their camera had a glitch creating phantom images. But both of them knew the truth. Something was in those photos. Something was following them, and it was getting closer. On day 5, they decided to leave the trail early. Catherine was terrified, and James was starting to feel it too. An inexplicable unease, a sense of being hunted. But before they could pack up and hike out, something happened that neither of them could explain. They woke up on the morning of day 5 to find their campsite had been rearranged in the night. Their sleeping bags were unzipped and folded neatly outside the tent. Their supplies were moved to different locations. And their camera, the digital camera documenting their journey, was sitting on a rock directly in front of their tent, facing them. Someone had been in their camp in the middle of the night. While they slept, while they were completely vulnerable, Catherine broke down. James called for a helicopter evacuation using an emergency satellite communicator. By that afternoon, they were extracted from the trail. In the days following their evacuation, James backed up the photos to his computer. What he found was even more disturbing than the images of the figure. There were photos they had no memory of taking. Dozens of them. Photos taken in the middle of the night, inside the tent, showing James and Catherine asleep. Photos taken from angles that should have been impossible. From outside the tent, shooting through the fabric, capturing their faces in perfect detail. And in every single one of these photos, the mysterious figure was visible in the background, standing over the tent. James and Catherine reported the incident to the local park rangers and then to the state police. The official conclusion was that another hiker had been camping nearby and taken the photos, perhaps out of some misguided form of attention-seeking or as a prank. But the couple knew better. No other hiker could move so silently. No other hiker could break into their tent without waking them. And no other hiker could have known to position themselves perfectly for those photos. James and Catherine were eventually diagnosed with what doctors called shared delusion, a rare psychological condition where two people in close contact develop the same false beliefs about reality. But 6 years after their experience, James gave an interview where he revealed something he'd never shared publicly. That wasn't a shared delusion. That wasn't a prank by another hiker. What we experienced was real. The photos are real. The evidence is real. And whatever followed us on that trail was real. Doctors can call it mental illness all they want. But I know what Catherine and I saw. I know what was in those photos. And I know that something on that section of the Appalachian Trail is hunting people. Slowly, methodically, getting closer with each night. And the worst part? We don't know if it stopped hunting us when we left the trail, or if it's still out there, waiting for us to make the mistake of going back. James and Catherine are no longer in contact with each other. Catherine moved to the West Coast and stopped hiking entirely. James occasionally hikes, but never alone, and never on the Appalachian Trail. Story 5. The Watchers in the Mist. By far one of the most credible reports of paranormal activity on the Appalachian Trail comes from a ranger named Thomas O'Brien, who worked for the National Park Service for 15 years. O'Brien was not a believer in the paranormal. He was a pragmatist, a scientist, a man who dealt in facts. But in 2008, he experienced something that shattered his rational worldview. While conducting a routine trail maintenance hike in Pennsylvania, O'Brien noticed a strange fog settling into a valley below the trail. This wasn't unusual. Mountain fog is common in these regions. But something about this particular fog felt different. It was too still, too quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath. O'Brien decided to investigate. He descended into the valley to determine if the fog posed any hazard to hikers or if it was obscuring any portions of the trail. As he walked deeper into the fog, visibility dropped to nearly zero. He could barely see 5 feet in front of him, but he could hear something. Voices, multiple voices, whispering in unison. He couldn't make out words, but he could hear the cadence of speech, the rise and fall of conversation. The voices seemed to be coming from all directions at once. O'Brien called out, asking if anyone was there. His voice echoed into the fog and disappeared, swallowed by the white emptiness. The whispering stopped. O'Brien continued forward, moving slowly, carefully. He decided to follow the trail markers to ensure he didn't get lost in the fog. But then he made a discovery that terrified him. The trail markers seemed to be leading in a circle. He'd hiked for what should have been a quarter mile, but he was back at the same location, recognizable by a distinctive rock formation. He checked his compass. It was accurate. He checked his map. He was where he should be. But he'd somehow looped back. He tried again. This time, he hiked for longer, being very careful to follow the marked trail. After what should have been half a mile, he checked his surroundings. Again, he was back at the distinctive rock. O'Brien was now genuinely frightened. He decided to stop trying to navigate the fog and instead wait for it to clear. He sat on a rock and pulled out his watch to check the time. It was 3 p.m. He would wait an hour, then try again if the fog hadn't lifted. While waiting, the whispering returned. But this time, it was louder, more insistent, and O'Brien thought he could make out words. Come closer, come see. O'Brien stood up, his hand on his radio, ready to call for assistance. But before he could make the call, he saw them. Figures in the fog, multiple figures, standing perfectly still, watching him. They were vaguely human in shape, but something about their proportions was deeply wrong. They were too tall, too thin. They moved unnaturally, as if their bodies didn't bend the way human bodies bend. Most disturbing, they didn't seem to be looking at him with eyes. They seemed to be looking at him with their entire bodies, their entire beings focused on him with an intensity that was almost palpable. One of them took a step forward. O'Brien bolted. He ran up the mountainside, abandoning the trail, running blindly through the fog, crashing through undergrowth, branches cutting his face and arms. He didn't care about direction or safety. He just ran. When he finally burst out of the fog, 30 minutes later, he checked his watch. It was 3:15 p.m. Only 15 minutes had passed. Despite the fact that he'd been lost in the fog, disoriented, running for what felt like half an hour, less than 15 minutes had elapsed. O'Brien made his way back to the ranger station as quickly as possible. He reported the incident to his supervisor, who noted that O'Brien appeared shaken and suggested he take a few days off. O'Brien took 2 weeks off. When he returned, he requested a transfer to a different region and eventually left the National Park Service entirely. Years later, he gave a statement to a paranormal investigation group. "I don't know what those things were, but I know they weren't human. I know they were intelligent, and I know they were watching that particular section of trail for a reason. They weren't there by accident. They were there waiting." In 15 years of working for the NPS, I'd heard stories from hikers about strange experiences on the trail. I'd always dismissed them as exaggeration, as people's fears getting the better of them in the wilderness. But that day, I became a believer. Whatever exists in that valley exists by its own rules. Rules that have nothing to do with time or space as we understand them. And if you ever find yourself in fog on that section of trail, if you ever hear voices calling to you, don't follow them. Don't investigate. Don't let curiosity kill you. Story 6. The Lost Audio Recording. In 2016, a hiker named Stephen Walsh uploaded an audio recording to an online paranormal community forum. The recording was found on a portable digital recorder that Walsh discovered at a shelter site on the Appalachian Trail in Maine. The device was weathered, covered in dirt and mold, clearly having been left in the elements for some time. But it still had battery power, and it still contained data. What was recorded on that device became one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence of paranormal activity on the trail. The audio begins with the voice of a man, calm, measured, speaking into the recorder. He identifies himself as Alexander Hughes, a solo hiker, and notes the date as September 15, 1994. "I'm making this recording because I want someone to know what's happening. In case I don't make it off this trail. In case something prevents me from leaving. I've been on the trail for 3 weeks now, and for the past 4 days, I've been followed. Not by another hiker, by something else, something I can't identify, can't understand, and can't escape." There's a long silence. Then, the first time I noticed it, I thought I was being paranoid. You hear sounds in the forest. You see movement in your peripheral vision, and you start to jump at shadows. That's normal for solo backpacking. But this is different. This is deliberate. This is intelligent. Whatever is following me, it knows I'm here. It's toying with me, testing me. Another pause. Then, today, it got close. Closer than ever before. I was hiking through a dense section of pine forest. The light was low. It was late afternoon. And I realized I hadn't seen another person in 2 days. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Behind me. Heavy, rhythmic breathing. I turned around, and it was there. At the edge of the trees. Watching me. I tried to run, but it matched my pace. Every move I made, it mirrored. I ran faster. It ran faster. I cut off the trail. It followed. Eventually, I stopped. I couldn't outrun it, and I was too exhausted to keep going. I turned to face it. And that's when I saw something that changed everything. Its face. I saw its face. It was. I don't have the words. It looked like something that had never been human, but had once studied humans. It looked at me like an insect examining another insect. Curious, predatory. I asked it what it was. Out loud, I asked, "What are you?" And it answered me, not in words, but I understood it anyway. The meaning just appeared in my mind, as if it had placed the thought directly into my consciousness. It said, "We are the memory of this place, the history that existed before humans walked here, and you are trespassing." Then it told me, without words, that this trail, all of this land, belongs to something older than humanity. Something that doesn't want us here. Something that hunts us when we venture into its territory. It told me it had taken others. Dozens over the years. Hikers who vanished without a trace. They didn't escape. They weren't lost. They were claimed. It told me I could leave. One last mercy. I could leave the trail, return to human civilization, and I would be spared. But if I continued hiking, if I went deeper into the wilderness, I would be taken. That's what it said. You will be taken. I hiked out. I ran out. Really. I didn't stop until I was at a ranger station. I packed up my supplies and left that day. But I can feel it. Even now, back in civilization. Back in my apartment in Boston. I can feel it watching. Waiting. I don't know what that thing was. But I know it's real. And I know it's still out there. If anyone finds this recording, I want you to know, the Appalachian Trail is not safe. Not completely. There are sections where something hunts. Something intelligent. Something that has been hunting long before we ever set foot on those mountains. Please, if you're planning to hike that trail, consider an alternative. Or at least, don't go alone. Don't venture too deep, because something out there is watching for stragglers. This is Alexander Hughes. Date: September 19, 1994. I'm leaving the trail today. This may be the last message I ever record. If I disappear, you'll know why. The date on the recording was September 19, 1994. That was 22 years before Stephen Walsh found the digital recorder on the trail in 2016. Alexander Hughes was never heard from again after that recording. He didn't return to his apartment. He didn't contact family or friends. He simply vanished. What makes this story even more disturbing is that Alexander Hughes was eventually declared legally dead in 1997, 3 years after the recording. But no body was ever found. No remains. No evidence of what happened to him. Investigators have analyzed the recording for signs of a hoax or manipulation. While the audio quality is degraded, likely due to age and exposure to the elements, audio forensics experts confirmed that the recording is genuine, not fabricated. It matches the technical specifications of portable digital recorders from the early 1990s, and the voice, when compared to recordings of Alexander Hughes from before his disappearance, is definitively him. So the question remains, what happened to Alexander Hughes? Did he successfully escape, as he claimed in the recording? And if so, why did he vanish? Or did he decide to go back? Did something lure him back to that trail? Back to whatever entity had claimed so many others? Story 7. The Return. Every story we've told you tonight, Robert's disappearance, the Midnight Watcher, the Silent Hiker, the Vanishing Couple, the Watchers in the Mist, the lost audio recording, they all took place on the Appalachian Trail. They all happened. They're documented. They're real. But here's what's important. None of these encounters exist in isolation. They're not random, disconnected events. They're a pattern. Over the past 30 years, researchers have documented approximately 17 major disappearances and paranormal encounters on the Appalachian Trail that share common elements. Hikers report being followed. Time distortions occur. Electronic devices malfunction or record unexplained phenomena. Hikers report encounters with impossibly tall, thin humanoid figures. Many of the missing hikers are never found. Those who do escape refuse to ever return to the trail. But here's the truly disturbing part. Certain hikers who have had encounters with these entities, have reported that the experiences didn't end when they left the trail. They continued to feel watched, continued to sense a presence following them. Some report hearing whispers in the night, even years after their encounter. And most disturbing of all, some of these hikers have eventually gone back. Against all logic, against every rational thought telling them not to return, they've hiked back to the trail. Back to the place that terrified them. Back to the presence that hunted them. And when they return, they don't leave again. The question is, why? Are they being drawn back? Are they compelled by some force to return to the trail, to venture deeper into the wilderness where something ancient and hungry is waiting? Or have they been changed by their encounters, fundamentally altered in a way that makes them no longer fully human? Transformed into something else, something that belongs to the trail, something that hunts alongside the entities we've described tonight? If you're planning to hike the Appalachian Trail, please be careful. Be aware, stay in groups, stay alert, and if you feel like you're being watched, if you feel an inexplicable sense of dread pulling you deeper into the wilderness, trust that feeling. Don't ignore it. Don't rationalize it. Don't push forward, because something on that trail has been hunting for a long, long time. And it's always looking for its next prey. The Appalachian Trail stretches over 2,000 miles. It's one of America's most iconic natural landmarks. But beneath that beauty, beneath those mountains and forests, something waits. Something that was there long before the first humans set foot on those paths. And something that will be there long after we're gone. Thank you for listening to these stories. And please, be safe out there.